To begin, I acknowledge that we are gathered on the land of the first and continuing custodians of Melbourne, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung of the Kulin Nation. I offer respect to their elders, both past and present, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. As I said, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here tonight. This is our first lecture for this year in a new series called the Bold Thinking Series, and it's really fantastic to have so many people. There are people not just full in here, but also many others in another space watching the event online. So it's really great, and we hope that you can continue to support the series. We've got quite a range of fantastic talks. The next one, by the way, for your diary, if you want to put it in your diary, is April the 5th at 11:30 a.m. at State Library of Victoria, where Professor Robert Mann is in conversation with Waleed Ali on the theme, Islam, What Are We Afraid Of? So please put that in your diary, but there'll be more information coming out on that. Tonight we are talking in conversation on the theme of autism, which is an area of great strength at La Trobe University, and this is the aim of the series, to showcase our research and also to talk with you, the community, about the range of things that we do, and autism is definitely one of those. I'd just like to introduce our speakers. They might have to put their hand up or something. The first is Professor Cheryl Dissanayake, who is the founding director of the Olga Tennyson Research Centre, or OTARC, the first centre in Australia dedicated to autism spectrum disorders. Professor Dissanayake has dedicated more than 3 decades towards researching autism. Prior to joining La Trobe in 1996, she earned a PhD at Monash University and spent time working at UCLA. In her time at La Trobe, Professor Dissanayake has been instrumental in establishing and leading an active research program, and I can assure you it's very active. Dr. Amanda Richdale is the Associate Professor and Principal Research Fellow at the Olga Tennyson Research Centre, or OTARC as we generally know it. Dr. Richdale earned her PhD at La Trobe in 1992, and afterwards she joined RMIT as a lecturer in Psychology and Disability Studies, remaining there until 2008. In 2009, Dr. Richdale returned to La Trobe in her current role with ATARC, having been given an honorary appointment in 2008. Dr. Richdale is an active member in the autism community. She's co-founder of Autism Victoria, now AMADZA, Research Reference Group, and an instrumental member of many other research groups and organisations. Judy Brewer AO, in the blue, is chair of Autism CRC, regular speaker and writer on issues relating to families caring for family members with special needs. As a parent of a young adult with autism spectrum disorder, she has been actively involved in a number of autism and carer organisations and is a life member of Autism Spectrum Australia, convener of the Autism Future Leaders program, and founder of Autism Asperger's Advocacy Australia. John Doyle is an Australian actor, comedian and screenwriter, best known as Rampaging Roy Slaven of Roy and HG fame. John grew up in 1950s rural Australia with his parents and older sister Jennifer, who was on the autism spectrum. John became patron for Autism Spectrum Australia Aspect after he was inspired to help other families living with autism by sharing his own family's experiences and some of the difficulties they faced earlier on. And lastly, Nick Nikoliev is an adult with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and was diagnosed in 2005. Nick is an active and enthusiastic member of Asperger's Victoria, fulfilling a number of volunteer roles as well as participating in the adult support group. Since his diagnosis, Nick has explained his life journey and living with ASD to a number of groups, including OTARC, community support groups, schools and students. And finally, our host, Francis Leach, is a radio personality and former current affairs journalist. He's currently co-hosting SEN's breakfast program with former Melbourne Demon David Schwartz. Francis is a self-confessed man in love with ideas. He's passionate about people, sport, music, popular culture and great writing, and he connects with audiences around the world. So in the words of Tony Jones, please welcome our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Just to start things off, just to let you know about the format for tonight, we're going to be in conversation for about an hour, and then we're going to invite you to participate as well. I do think it's important at the outset to outline what we're trying to achieve here, a conversation amongst us in the process of putting this on, that this is not attempting to be, nor should it be considered to be, the definitive panel on this issue. No one here is trying to, in that sense, define the conversation. But what we are trying to do is give it a starting point, and also through the lived experience of everyone on this stage, their experience. We can only ever see the world through our own eyes, and then from beyond there we need to try to learn from other people's experience, what we infer, what we feel, what we touch, what we feel in the world around us. So while this might not be representative of your experience, it is what it is, and the conversation needs to start somewhere, and here tonight we're going to try to start that conversation and then encourage you in other forums, in other ways, to take on that responsibility, which you probably already are doing, to have that conversation further and to get what you need from it in order to improve the quality of your own life and for others around you. So let's start with Cheryl. Cheryl, I want to start with you because we have to start somewhere. 1984 was when you first had an interest in this area. Can you give us a picture of the landscape of what the world's relationship was to what was then known as autism?
Absolutely. Actually, it was 1982.
82.
And our lecturer, one of my third-year lecturers, talked about autism, and it turned me on. And I then I did my PhD my honours in 83 with her, and I began my PhD in 84 in autism. So it was a long time ago, and in fact, our conceptualization of autism was very different back then.
Was it seen as a singular condition?
It was seen as an absolutely singular condition, and people were trying to find the core features of the one autism and trying to understand the causes of the one autism. And we've really come such a long way in the last 30 years. And so our conceptualization of autism has really changed. And when I first came into the field, people with autism really didn't have a voice. And we now have because what we called autism was really different. And we now have a large number of people with autism who have a voice, a loud voice, who can tell us what it's like to be autistic. And we've learned from them enormously about autism. So I think that's a really important point that we didn't have when I first came into the field. And in fact, as a PhD student, I met one of those first voices with Temple Grandin, who was also doing her PhD at the same time as I was. And so we met at a conference. And so she really was the first person with autism who could talk about her autism with me and other people. And as everyone in this room, I'm sure, knows, she's been a fantastic voice.
I'm interested in that. Was it a case that it was the first time someone was able to talk, or was it that you had to evolve the way that you listened and understood so that they could be heard, which is a very different thing?
I think it's probably both of those things. You know, we used to talk about early infantile autism, and so it was these very rather severe children who were affected, and, you know, we didn't know any adults with autism. We just knew children till, you know, as I said, I was introduced to this woman who claimed she was autistic, and she certainly is. Anyone who's met Temple knows that. And she became an academic and started writing academic papers about what it was like being autistic. And I think she was really provided that first window into autism. And so I think we've really have come a long way. And what I guess we're trying to do here, and certainly under the banner of the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre, and I would also think under the Autism CRC, is to begin to have these conversations. And so some of the work we're certainly doing at the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre, I'm saying this because Olga Tennyson is sitting right here and she really hates me saying this. She'd rather me call it the RACV, but I insist on calling it what it is. And so what we're really trying to do, I think, is first, we've got a large research program on very early identification, so trying to look at babies and infants developing autism. And one of the reasons why we're really trying to do that is so that we know, and this work is, we're also working within the CRC to do this, is to try and identify very early so we can also intervene very early. Now, I've heard a lot of conversations with people saying, well, we don't need intervention. And many people don't need intervention, but many do. And I guess our focus in intervening as early as we can is so that that little person with autism can communicate.
Well, I'm interested because, Nick, your diagnosis was relatively late, wasn't it? I mean, it was only, 10 or 15 years ago that
That's correct, yeah.
So what was life like for you before that?
Well, I didn't know that I was different. When I went to school, for example, all that mattered was individual scholastic performance. So I didn't care that I didn't play well with others. When I went to work, I got into trouble at work, and people were saying things like, Nick, you have to take into account how other people feel. I understood those words, I didn't know how to do it, and no one could tell me how to do it. So that's what it was like. I didn't know I was different. I thought everyone was like me, and I thought everyone was as confused as I was.
So when you were diagnosed, how did that change for you, or did it?
Well, up until I was diagnosed, the only experience or exposure I had to anything to do with autism was the film with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman.
Rain Man.
Rain Man. And when my psychologist said I had Asperger's syndrome and I was autistic, my initial reaction was, well, I'm nothing like Dustin Hoffman. I don't have his brilliance, I can't count matches on the floor, and I don't mumble too much as far as I know, so I didn't understand it at all. And I was a bit distressed a little, and when I went back to work, and I told the people I work with, the HR person said, but Nick, you're the same person you were yesterday before the diagnosis. There's nothing about you that's changed. So that made a huge difference to me. And up until the diagnosis, because I have a partner, a non-autistic partner, we've been together for nearly 30 years now, and she would always say, Nick, you don't get me. No, I know why. I don't get anyone. The diagnosis changed my life dramatically for the better. Now I know lots more about myself. Now I'm more confident in asking my partner and other friends of mine to help me. And I made the choice early on after my diagnosis. I could either choose to be an outstanding ASD Nick or a very mediocre non-ASD copy.
Yeah.
And I chose the former.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, we'll talk about how. I want to talk to you at some point about the sort of the way that you, what changes you did make. But I want to take it back to John's experience, because you were diagnosed and you obviously made some choices and had the chance to make choices. But John, when your sister was growing up, give us an understanding of what it was like, and the environment in which your family had to live with her condition.
All right. You've got to go back to the dark ages of the 1950s. My sister was born in 56, and Mum and Dad realised pretty early on that I think that we had an unusual person in our midst, because by the age of 5 she'd expressed no interest in walking or talking. So it was my grandmother, who was a very stern Edwardian woman, who decided she had to take charge. And through brute force, essentially, got Jen on her feet and started getting her to move, walk around. But the reason she wasn't walking is because she wasn't interested in walking. She wasn't interested in much at all, really. She was only interested in what was immediately in front of her. She didn't need to speak because she was completely satisfied with the service that she'd received thus far, it would seem, with her life. But when speech came, it came in an unusual sort of way. She, and still does to this day, refers to herself in the third person. She'll talk about what she would like. Jen would like this now, she would like that now. No, she doesn't want that. The unfortunate downside of my grandmother taking charge is that because she'd had so much success in getting her on her feet and getting her talking, she decided to teach her to read and write. Jen was naturally a left-hander, but my grandmother insisted she write with her right hand. To this day, we can determine what sort of day it is by asking her, "Is Arm happy today?" Usually it's a unhappy Arm day. Most days Arm is unhappy. The arm that's unhappy is the left arm that was never used. And this became a sort of interesting character for her, because when she got particularly destructive, both to herself and things around her, smashing objects, materials, etc., she would blame Arm. Arm did it wasn't me. So, and she lives with this to this day, of course. I'm always particularly interested whenever I speak to her, which is regularly. My first question is always, "How's Arm?" Arm's always inevitably unhappy. She was diagnosed as being subnormal, and so went to a subnormal school, Sunnybank School for the Subnormal.
That was the actual phrase in use at the time.
Yes. She did go to a public primary school for 2 weeks. Didn't work out at all. No, she hated it and was a handful. I actually bumped into her teacher about 6 months ago, who was very interested to know how she got on. He still remembered her vividly from that 2 weeks that he had her in, must have been second class by then. When difficulties really began, when adolescence kicked in and all the hormonal things started, she became a real handful. The house had to be dedicated to her in many ways. The fridge had to be bolted at night, otherwise she would eat everything and make herself sick. Things on the table had to be placed in specific ways. Everyone's life had to make accommodation for, we didn't want to upset or bring about the fury, because when the fury came, the fury could last from an hour to a week, and I mean continual screaming frustration. This was very difficult to deal with. Essentially, the blinds came down on the house. We saw very few people. We welcomed no one. When Largactyl came into the picture, she became like a zombie. She would walk and rock for 15, 20 hours without stopping. And she hated the fog that she was in and would say so, she hates the fog. But the fog made life manageable and bearable for Mum. There was no assistance of any sort. In fact, when she was diagnosed in 1966, the word autism came into the house for the very first time. Because up until that stage, I don't think it was even recognised as a particular condition. It was sort of relief to know that she had something, but there were no services available, and Dr. Vern Barnett, who had diagnosed her, who had a daughter who was autistic, offered to take her and give her some sort of institutionalised assistance, I assume. But Mum and Dad refused that because they thought it was an abrogation of their responsibility, and that God had determined that this was their life was a vale of tears, If it is a vale of tears, this is the vale of tears we have to accept. So as a result, and I should point out that Mum had every reason to be sceptical and somewhat untrustworthy of institutionalised service, because her sister was a nurse who worked at Broughton Hall, who filled her with these horrific stories of what was going on there. So Mum determined that there would be no intervention of any sort with Jen. So as a result, Jen could have been a high-functioning person. But as a result of no diagnosis and no intervention of any sort, she has lived a life most unsatisfied, a life of frustration, a life without friends, and a life that has denied her any independence of any sort. She cannot feed herself, clothe herself, or toilet herself. She requires 24-hour care, 365 days a year, and had circumstances been different, she may well have had a much greater quality of life. There is no doubt.
And hence, I guess, your passion to try to make sure that doesn't become the fate for others. And
Indeed, yes.
And I'm interested because the other side of that experience is that functionality of life that might have been the circumstance where families have to function, they have to work, they have to live, and so utilitarian decisions might be made in order to meet everyone's need, not just the person suffering. But Judy, your own experience is a revolution in thinking in that regard, many years on from Jen's diagnosis, and it's about trying to think differently about the condition and how to approach it. Tell us your story in that regard.
Sure, Francis. So our son, Harrison, is 22. So I've been on this journey now for nearly 20 years. He was diagnosed in 1995, one suspects. So jumping forward from John's experience. And in many ways, there hadn't been a lot of progress in that time. I mean, yes, the understanding was starting to grow. We talked, and Cheryl talked about Temple Grandin being such a breakthrough, being able to, and I remember the same thing, reading Temple Grandin's words as the first adult autistic person who I heard speaking in that first voice, and how powerful that was, and dreaming that one day our son would be able to tell us what he was experiencing and how we could make his life happier and more fulfilling. Fortunately, he does. He absolutely does, and he has a happy life, and he is very fulfilled. And so I've had a very good journey over those 20 years. A tough learning journey for me, and a lot of things when you talk about finding those sort of aha moments, and there've been quite a few of them.
Well, tell us about the first one.
Probably the first one, I think, was after the diagnosis at age, when he was age 3. And like so many parents, my understanding of autism was zero. I love your point of reference on Rain Man, Nick, because, again, most people's point of reference is Rain Man. It's a bit of a sad indictment that we all have this one Hollywood film that everyone accepts is based on a combination of characters and not terribly factual, but we can relate to bits and pieces in that film, and I think everyone has their favourite little bit, but really if that's our point of reference, we haven't achieved a lot in terms of community education. So I was a bit the same, and we were told, we think your son has autism. Again, 3 years of searching before anyone even mentioned autism, and now working in autism research, I still wonder how on earth it was ticking every box. Like, how did we miss this? How did everyone miss this? How could so many people... And that does set you back when you're looking at early intervention, and we know that the earlier the intervention, the earlier you understand, how you can help accommodate autism, the happier and the greater the advances for kids. So the big thing for me, I think, was that it wasn't about me as a parent. It's a hard thing as a parent because you think your life's going to... He was our first child. Everything was going along swimmingly, and you think, oh, I'm not ready for this detour, So I say to parents now very much, it might be brutal, but get over that, because the sooner you get to the acceptance phase and you go through all that, but I thought life was going to be like that, and you say, well, life's not going to be like that. We're going down some other path, and this might be an interesting path too, as it has proved to be. And there's no rights, there's no wrongs, there's no better, there's no worse, there's just another pathway. And that pathway is going to be a life-enriching one. So, fast forward through what is a very typical experience of, a lack of early intervention, schools not wanting our son to be enrolled there. I think 21 schools rejected him.
Okay, let's just stop there for a second.
Yeah.
What would the experience of that be? What would be the
Horrific,
of those
actually.
21 rejections? What was the
Well, we had the
usual
view that
experience?
mainstream was the right place for our son.
Yeah.
We couldn't see that that there was any reason for him not to be part of the community, and that was what we wanted for him. The education system, again, we're going back a few years, and I still find families where that first school is a really difficult step, but that lack of understanding and schools feeling that they just could not provide what he would need to give him a safe and nurturing environment. I feel sorry for them, because it wasn't anything discriminatory in a sense. It was simply, I'm not empowered to be able to, get him to reach his potential. Our mainstream schools still are not empowered. We've made progress, but not enough. So that constant rejection was incredibly difficult, and not having anywhere to go for answers of where best practice might be, and what was the system that was going to work best for him. And we know every child and every autistic adult is different, completely different, has a different set of
just like the
profile.
rest of us. Just
No,
like everybody.
Exactly. So, for him, sport wasn't a big thing, or music or art or whatever. So, he had that same profile that every other child has. So finding the right, people think there's going to be some magic answer about that right school. In the end, he actually went to a school, our little country school, our little farming community, a one-teacher school. So this notion of, I thought, he'll have to go to the best school with the most teachers and the most whiz-bang things that can happen and the most technology. And in fact, the best place for him was a school that he was just like anyone else. And a school that, he was different. And that was such a big learning for me, that community is the difference.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But you said something really interesting there, because, Amanda, we spoke in preparation for this. You talked about the element of people who have the experience of autism, and we know it's as rich and varied as the galaxy has stars, but there are some folks who, a bit like what Judy was saying there, feel they are as everyday normal as everyone else and don't even want to be considered to be with the condition.
That's correct. I think a diagnosis or a condition is only useful if it helps you get supports and services and get the things that you might need to have a fulfilling life. And so people may not feel that there's any use in that for them, but I think knowing if you have a diagnosis of autism, it gives you a pathway to start exploring what's similar and what's different, and also helping other people understand how you might be similar to them but different to them, how you might view the world in a slightly different way, how you might have trouble seeing other people's perspective. Just like if I talk for myself, if I had to earn my living with music, playing the piano or anything like that, I would be totally unemployed and utterly useless, because we've all got things that we're good at and we've all got things that we're bad at. And I think that's what we have to recognise. But I think that the diagnosis does help have a starting point for conversations about
Does it help you inform your
similarities
choices
and
as well?
difference.
If you're living with the condition, you can then choose how you want to relate to
Yes.
it?
I think you can choose how you want to relate to it, and sometimes, like Nick said, it helps you understand yourself too, because it's, well, why don't I get this?
Did life become easier for you, Nick, immediately that you understood that?
When I was diagnosed?
Yeah, when you understood why
It became easier. I guess I was, because being a person on the spectrum, on top of that, I'm my own individual person.
Yeah.
The only person
You're not
I know...
defined by it, are you?
No. I'm an individual, and I'm a human being as well. And like every other human being, I have different needs to others, as well as the Asperger's side of things. So I didn't really want, for example, a whole lot of friends or a big social circle or intermingling, that sort of thing. But to a degree, before the diagnosis, I kept trying to do what my peers were doing. And I could never do a lot of it as well. Once I became diagnosed, I stopped trying to be someone I'm not.
Yep.
I stopped trying to fit in. I figured, which has proved correct, the few friends I have, because friendships are too much work to have a lot, the few friends I have appreciate me for who I am. And it doesn't matter about my condition or anything else about me. So that's what, in terms of life being easy, that was the biggest change. I stopped trying to be someone who I wasn't.
And I'm fascinated because when we had a chat too, you said to me that you were quite proud of your Aspie status in a way. I think the quote you gave was that all the people who fix up the world have Aspie. So others muck it up.
Yeah,
and
you
people
guys
with Aspies come along and fix it up.
My experience of a lot of, and this is very generic, and it's not meant to be individual, but if I look at, especially my field of expertise, the people not on the spectrum keep breaking things. So you need the people on the spectrum to fix it.
And that's important to acknowledge and recognise, Judy, because part of what we hear tonight is the hard road that people have to travel, and depending on their circumstances, that there's a lot of joy to be had from people who are living.
Because the joy is that, in fact, autistic people are so creative, and I don't mean creative that they're good at music, art, or whatever, but they have a capacity to think in a way that just... I wish I could. I have this sort of narrow brain that thinks in a little box and thinks, because I've been conditioned to think I must think this way because that's how I fit in with peers and that's how I fit in to be normal. It's nothing better than being in the company of people who are just think in a way that is inspiring, think in a, outside the box, and have the confidence. And this is where I love what's happened to our community, that our autistic community is the voice is being heard. They're saying, yeah, I think differently, and that's okay. And from that, that's how society moves on, because people who think differently are leaders. And, we need to listen to that voice. Our society is so much richer for that voice. And my life, I think and I'm not saying it hasn't been, a tough journey, because we, as a community, we just do not accommodate people that think outside the box very well. So the journey is harder than it should be. And it's not autistic people that need to change, it's the community that need to change.
And you, when we spoke, also talked about how you changed in terms of the way you listened to your boy and what you heard from him from that.
Well, exactly. Nick made a great point about friends. One of the things I see in going around schools is families saying, but my child has no friends, doesn't get invited to birthday parties, doesn't have playmates that come over and talk about nothing. Well, we should celebrate that, really, because I'm really proud of my son, because he doesn't have playmates that come over and watch the Kardashians. He's not interested in that. He loves his football, he loves his aviation. He's pretty good at IT. He's got lots of stuff he's interested in, and he's a mean chess player too. So he's got his things he does really well that are not something that can be forced on him. And so I look back to all those social groups and social training and, let's have a play date type thing. And I just wish I'd never even gone there, and just respected the fact that he had a right to choose to live his life as that sort of social being or not. And when I say that, that's a really neurotypical social being. He is a social being. He has the biggest footy tipping comp in the district.
Does he win it every year?
No, he missed the last round last year. And if he's watching this on the streaming, he'll be really, really annoyed that I said he does barrack for the Hawks, so he has something going for him. Not in my view, but in his view. So he does lots of things that are social, and they connect him to people. But the idea of having that sort of nothing social relationship, friendships, So I've learnt that from him, and I've probably done a bit of pruning in my own life along the same lines.
I bet you've discovered a lot about people you thought you knew. John, in terms of somebody like Jen who had a more severe incapacity to communicate, how do you get to know her, or can you?
what Jen does have, she has a terrific sense of humour.
Yeah. That's running the family.
And
then.
the way the humour expresses itself, it's the humour of cruelty. Now,
It really runs in the family. Yes.
a couple of instances come to mind. She used to love, in the old days, going out to the backyard and screaming, "Dad, stop hitting me! Stop hitting me!" Bellowing, you could hear it blocks away. Dad wasn't even home. But when Dad did get home, people would be looking at him. That guy. I remember we got colour television, which meant a priest dropped in. Father Sullivan, Irishman. So, you're beautiful. You've got a beautiful television there, Mr. Doyle. And so Jen went up to him and said, "And I hear you have terrible gastric, Father." Well, he didn't know what to do. "Oh, yes, he's got shock and gastric. Oh, Father Sullivan is full of gastric." He left after about 3. He didn't come back.
No. Did the family a favour there.
She would embarrass people. She had a genius, and still does sometimes, whenever it occurs to her. She has a genius for picking the very thing that someone doesn't want referred to. If someone has a big nose, they're going to know it. Doesn't matter. She has this genius for unsettling and making people feel awkward. It amuses her. But it can be hard work.
Yeah, especially if you're the victim or the butt of it.
But having said that, I've forgotten what your question was.
Oh, just how you get to know someone.
Oh.
Or you how do you find a way to listen to her as a person?
Well, I don't think I know. I don't think anyone knows her very well.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think words have different meanings for her than they do for the rest of us. Largely, she has an understanding of what conversation is, but it's often so. It's a code that I cannot break.
Yeah.
I've never been able to break the code. I wish I could, but I can't. So I have never been able to have a conversation with her. We talk, but there's never a conversation, and I don't know any of us who've ever had a conversation with her. Mind you, she now has formed a relationship with a beautiful woman called Sue, who works with House with No Steps. And Sue has told me that she's actually had a couple of conversations with Jen, so that's great. But what they're about, I've no idea.
But it's interesting because Jen missed out on early intervention or the sort of therapy that might allow, Cheryl, someone to develop a means of communication that might be non-verbal but can still express the range of emotions and help alleviate the frustration that people living with the condition might have. Are we getting better at that? And are there ways, are you finding ways now that people who have, even with siblings or children with severe versions of the condition are able to find a way to connect and communicate?
We are getting better with that. We are getting much better with that. And I think just beginning very early enables the young person with autism to communicate, whichever means that is. But I think that's one of the most critical things you can really provide for a person with autism is that ability so that they then have a voice. They then can affect their impact on the world. So that really is why I think we need to, get younger and younger so that when, we all know the brain's most malleable. Mind you, saying that intervention at any age, at any stage is always useful in providing support for the person. But we do know that how brains develop, and in the early years, brains are much more malleable. You and I would be able to learn a second language much more easily than were we to try now. So we know a lot about the way the brain develops, and so being able to impact early on to give that person with autism a voice, because there are many people still with autism without a voice, who I think aren't having a decent life because they aren't able to express themselves. They aren't able to make the decisions, or at least communicate those decisions in a way to others to have their needs met. They aren't able to contribute in a way they might want to. Employment, of course, is one such way.
That's a really big one, and I wanted to talk about that here. Nick, you work full-time. Or you work part-time. What sort of work are you doing?
Well, I picked for myself, competition is very bad. So I would not function well in a work environment where I was doing the same job as most others, because invariably part of my nature is to compare myself with others, and because of who I am, there are going to be times when I come up short, which is not making me feel good. So I tend to pick an area of specialty, which in my case is quality management, which is very specialised and is not you won't have many quality engineers in an engineering firm, for example. So that's the kind of work I do. And in fact, I always disclose about my condition. I can't wait to tell everybody about it because it's fantastic for me.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started working for an aerospace defence organisation, which was my last full-time position. And the day I got there, the project manager said, "Nick, get up and tell us about what it's like to have Asperger's." I had to tell the whole project. So that was fine, I told them that. And at the end of my tenure, which was to do with the parent company finances being difficult, it wasn't any technical reason I became redundant, they actually said, "Nick, if we can make your condition mandatory for the kind of work you do and how well you do it, we would." And these are people with 30 years experience doing defence engineering. Since that time, they've called me back technically for 3 months at a time to fix up a project that they broke because they couldn't fix it, but I could. So I'll just touch on this redundancy thing. My experience of the workforce and in looking for work is kind of like this. So the distance between my hands represents different skills, and the spreading of the fingers represents the different levels of competence. And it's sort of broad and pretty, not too deep. That's what work wants. That's what job descriptions are written like. That's what advertised jobs are written like. That's what the bosses want, and that's how they interpret you in work. That's not me. This is me.
Yep.
A really narrow, very deep competence across a few things, much broader than this gap. So if you can do that for me, please. And this is me. You see the intersection. It's not very much. So what that means in reality is in the work environment, I'm not as flexible. I can't change enough at times to suit the dynamics of the business world. So that means, for example, you'd be an idiot to have someone like me talk to your customers.
Oh, it'd be fun though.
Well, I can't lie. I take things literally. I don't understand about saying things a different way except other than factual. So if we stuff up and the customer asks, of course we stuff up. So they love me talking to suppliers. I can give them a very, very hard time. And so companies like that in me. So what I mean is if my specific niche dries up or changes, I'm not able to shift that terribly as easily or as quickly or even with the same sort of focus as someone else is in this sort of nebulous grey cloud of stuff.
But you have found employers who've understood that and been able to use your talents, haven't you?
Once I've been diagnosed, I've always found employers who have. But that's because, for example, in my current redundancy, I will not bother applying for jobs where my lack of non-Asperger skills, like dealing with customers or managing reports, is paramount. Because it's not going to be enjoyable for me, and it certainly won't be enjoyable for them.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're really honest. Can I
be anything else?
You're fantastic. And if we could sell self-awareness, we'd be millionaires because you're unbelievable. You understand yourself better than any of us could understand ourselves. But I'm interested because both Cheryl and Amanda, you work in this area of, one of the key elements to making sure that people with a condition can live fulfilling lives surely must be that they have a working life of some sort and get the same sort of fulfillment out of a working life that any of us would want. And we just heard from Nick there about his integration model and how difficult it is to fit into a conventional work pattern. Are you seeing changes across different sectors that now are allowing for someone with the incredible talents like Nick has to be able to harness that ability to the benefit of themselves and their employer? Is that happening anywhere?
I think it's happening with the project that we're currently involved in with
tell people about that.
Hewlett-Packard and Department of Human Services, where we have people with Asperger's syndrome going into specialist work in the computing areas. So they're going into, I'm going to have one of those middle-aged...
Software testing.
Yes, I was going to have one of those middle-aged, my words go out of my head these days. Software testing. And I think that it's built on the Danish model from Specialist Stern, the Dandelion program, and we're evaluating how well that model's working for the people with autism, for the people they work with, and for their families. And the feedback that we're getting is that the people with autism in those positions, the verbal feedback we're getting is that they're doing fantastically well and that they're finding things that neurotypicals are missing.
So attention to detail, really great persistence in jobs without getting bored. But I think I really like the way Nick was conceptualising it. It's this, and I think we need to find all of the thises. Software testing is one this, but there are many more, and I think our job is to really find those, because when we advertise for jobs, we talk about we want someone who's a great team player, who and someone with autism immediately would sort of say, well, that's not me.
That puts me in mind of a story of a gentleman I met who was probably in his late 30s and many years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago. And it was an indirect meeting through something else that I was doing, not actually connected with autism, but connected with learning difficulties. And he was very concerned. He hadn't actually had a diagnosis, but he thought he was autistic, and so did I. And I sent him off to somebody at the time who would have been hopefully being able to help him. But one of the things that he talked about was he really liked his job, he liked what he did, but one of the things that was worrying him was that they wanted to promote him to manage people. And because obviously, everyone wants to be promoted. They want to move up into these higher roles, whereas he was very happy, and his company was not understanding that he was very happy in the job that he did, that he understood it, that he did it well. And he didn't want to manage people because he wasn't a particularly social person. He had his life and it worked really well for him. That made him incredibly anxious to the point where he was thinking of resigning from his job.
Did he hang in there?
I don't know. I didn't see him again. I met him under this one-off circumstance and referred him off to somebody that I knew, who I hope he went to provide him with some support and help. But there was he was made so anxious about what Cheryl's talking about. We think everybody's like us and that we can put them, and we want them all to be social and work in groups. And we're all different, and we don't necessarily, and employers need to find people's skills and to recognise those skills and not to try and persuade people to do things that they're not good at. And for the person on the spectrum, this was a very anxiety-provoking thing. He was highly anxious about this, the fact that they wanted to make him a manager.
Well, Judy, I'm just interested in that too, that, business, like anything else, will be driven by self-interest. And if they can identify someone like Nick who has a particular set of skills that will advance their circumstance, they would usually accommodate them to do so. But we're also living in a world where business and working life is still not what it should be. Women still don't get equal pay across so many sectors for the equal work. So there is that lack of flexibility there at all. Are you confident or optimistic that people will realise that even through their own self-interest that employing people who might be autistic but have a very particular and important set of skills will be seen as an advantage rather than a disadvantage?
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, how we try to sort of put everything down to if we could evaluate this and prove it was, going to be economically advantageous, then we should do it. Now, we just should do it anyway, because it's actually just the right thing to do, that everyone has a place.
Yep.
And it's not just autistic people, but this notion of diversity within the workplace. means that you can have, and we try to, firstly, our autistic community is probably the most underemployed or even lacking in participation, even considering being in the workforce, and we know the statistics tell us of any disability grouping. And yet, probably the group that most wants to be in the workforce and has, such incredible skills, and I don't just mean that sort of splinter above average skills in software engineer or whatever. I just mean skills in being part of the workplace, part of life, part of the community. We also have this sort of pigeonholing around this IT, and I have to say my son works part-time in IT, so he perpetuates that myth perhaps, but he is, it's not that he loves IT, it's just that people have this idea, autistic people, I'll get them into IT because that's going to work. His IT skills are probably like any other 22-year-old. He's pretty good at it, basically, so he can hold down that job. But across all these areas of, logistics and risk management and animal husbandry, and I know there's a lot of autistic people in the racing industry because they love working with horses and animals, and it's a calming environment. In agriculture, there's so many areas that autistic people can bring partly through this unique sensory experience that many, and again we can't generalise, but many autistic people have very acute senses, and while we have a myth about lacking empathy, autistic people have incredible empathy and can feel often, particularly in animal husbandry, a sense of
it's Temple Grandin.
reading.
That's how she started working.
Temple Grandin, of course, is
60% of the meat industry in the US is the cattle yards are designed by her, because she's been able to design yards which don't stress the animals, so that they go into slaughter with not being stressed. And the reason she did that was she was able to really ascertain what was the best way to calm these animals and move them through cattle yards.
Some of that was based on her own experiences and what calmed and what she realised calmed her as well.
So beyond
really
this
unique
IT sort of narrow field, I think we've got to start thinking, there's a job for everyone, and not just autistic people. There is a job for everyone, but there's certainly a job for every autistic person
Amanda?
as well.
In that line, we did some work for the Department of Human Services here in Victoria, looking at what was happening with tertiary students, so students in TAFE and university, and we developed we developed a website as a result of that as supports, but so we interviewed a number of young people on the spectrum with autism from TAFEs and universities here in Victoria, and a number of others did some online questionnaires and so on, and they didn't all come from IT. In fact, less of them came from that typical science, technology and engineering area than they did from other areas. They were in history, they were in archaeology, they were in all sorts of different areas.
So like everyone else.
Like everyone else, they had a broad spectrum of interests. So when we plotted, what degree are you studying, or what TAFE certificate are you studying? There was library studies, there was archaeology, there was history, there was all sorts of things that these people were studying. So I think Judy's very right there. We've now sort of starting a new myth. People with autism are all good with computers, so that's where we should go and find employment for them.
We're going to throw it open to the floor for questions in a moment. I just want to finish by asking this question to you, John, and then Nick as well. Given the story you told about Jen and where your journey with the condition started, would it be a happy day if you could see a time where somebody with the condition could confidently enter the world knowing that they could be self-sufficient? If circumstance came that they could be self-sufficient and navigate the world in their own way, in their own distinct way, but be whole and complete.
Exactly. I have no doubt, as I might have mentioned earlier, I have no doubt that had what is available nowadays, had we been able to take that back, had circumstances been different for her, I have no doubt that my sister could be living an existence where she could be independent. And not only that, she does have incredible skills of focus. If that somehow could have been harnessed, it just drives me nuts. But I have so much hope for the future in this matter because so much is being done. Honestly, up until about 20 years ago, to mention autism, you get baffling. Nobody knew what you were talking about. It was like a code. Nowadays, there is so much more awareness. I find it extraordinary, and I'm utterly optimistic about what is happening.
And Nick, for yourself, I mean, you know, you work, you've got a partner, you've got a full life. You're confident that you can go out and navigate the world any way you really want to because you know yourself really well.
I do know myself really well, but I have a great reliance on my partner.
Yep.
Above and beyond the normal adult relationship I have, if I use an analogy, the non-Asperger world is like a tribe that's never seen civilization. They have their own culture, language, customs, behaviours, dress, mannerisms. To me, none of it makes any sense most of the time. I'm the archaeology professor with the pith helmet and the schoolboy shorts, trying to study and learn how this tribe works. My partner fulfills the role of the snotty-nosed kid from the tribe who wears a baseball cap and has sneakers and a Rolex watch, who is a part of the tribe but has some sort of understanding of my world and acts as a guide. So to help me cope most with the world, I rely a lot on my partner guiding me about what does that mean when that person's crying or whatever. I would like to finish by saying that the word autism, AUTISM, is an acronym. It means always unique, totally interesting, and sometimes mysterious.
And that's a perfect way to throw it to the floor and to you to ask any of our panellists some questions. I think Leah over here has a microphone, so if you pop your arm in the air, and I would like if you could, if we can pass the mic down and get it to whoever wants. If you could stand up, identify yourself and ask your question, it'd be great.
Hi, my name's Lisa. I'm a mother of 11-year-old identical twins on the autism spectrum, one more mild than the other. And we've been the beneficiaries and recipients of excellent early intervention. The word autism was mentioned when they were about 1. My boys, without knowing it, have worked really hard. We've done the hydrotherapy, speech, art therapy, music therapy, social skills groups. They have, with the benefits of government funding and policies and specialists, worked really hard to the point where they're now in grade 6 at a mainstream school. And for the first time now, I'm actually very scared for their future, because you sort of dropped the word before, Judy, about mainstream school. We've spent a lot of money on early intervention, which now seems to, for me anyway, we seem to have a handle on that. What's the next stage for the secondary? We actually visited a government autistic school today. That's not for my boys. A special education is not for my boys. And I'm very terrified for what their life might be like at a particularly sensitive time in mainstream school, where perhaps we will not have aids and that. And I don't know who or whether this is the forum for it, but I'm just realising I'm now in another world that's not so caring, not so supportive, through a particularly tentative time in their lives, and we actually don't really know where to go. And I'm just wondering if you know of any government policies to now look at teenagers and mainstream schools for students on the autism spectrum.
Judy, do you want to?
Yeah, look, it sounds like you've done incredible work, you know, and to know from the age of 1 to be able to do that intervention, I'm sure your kids are just, you know, have had just such good opportunities to date. So we don't want to stop that trajectory of going forward and making progress. And yet you're right, and I'm not trying to be negative, but a lot of families do find that year 6, year 7 transition is probably the most difficult. A whole lot of things are happening when kids go into years, you know, at 12, 13, talked about puberty and that transitioning and teens and the classrooms. I always say you can't, our kids are fine. I'm sure your kids are fine. They're going through, we've got to change the other kids, and we've got to change the teachers, and we've got to change the schools. It's the environment they're going into that we've got to change. And we've spent a lot of time saying, let's take this child out of class and give them an aid, and they can work over there with the aid. you can't do that all day, every day. What you've got to do is change that classroom that understands and accepts and accommodates, and whether that be the acoustics of the classroom, whether that be unstructured time in the playground, whether that be security, whether that be, you know, a learning program or supporting teachers. There's a whole lot of ways. We haven't done it well, so there's no simple answer. And I always say, when people say, what school should I go to? And it gets a bit like with the decision we had to make with our son. It's about leadership in schools. And the school you go to is the one that the principal wants your child there. That's what makes the difference. It comes from leadership. Every school has its own culture. It doesn't matter which school system you're in. You need to find a principal who gets it and then can create an environment that is inclusive, accepting, respectful, and will jump on bullying, because this is something our kids, it's horrendous what they've been through. So many people have been through in their secondary school years particularly. It's still there. It's causing enormous damage to our kids, and not just kids, autistic kids, a lot of kids. So again, universal design around classrooms. What works for our kids also works for other kids. We're not doing it very well, and this is the area, and the autism, the CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre for Autism, we have a number of projects around this universal design to make ASD-friendly classrooms. We have to do a lot more. So my answer to your question is, it's about the culture of the school. It's not
Judy,
about
is
anyone's...
sorry, your name? Can we offer Lisa some hope that there are schools out there?
There are,
absolutely.
Absolutely. The problem is that some
not enough,
systems...
not enough doing it properly, but there are some wonderful examples, but that's not going to help you, or that's not going to help someone else.
Families tend to find them, don't they?
So many families will actually physically uproot, and that doesn't mean just uprooting your autistic child or children.
Everybody.
It means uprooting your whole family or going away from your extended family to seek that education, because those years are so critical. So I think we're making progress. We need to stamp our feet a lot. Perhaps I shouldn't be encouraging it, but I am. We're not making enough noise at the political level about education. There are inquiries on at the moment. We need to make more
Judy,
noise.
is there a resource so parents can... Is there any site you can go to that says these schools offer...
No, and it's interesting. One of the assessments of schools, people say, you know, most families look at NAPLAN testing. You know what happens to autistic families when NAPLAN day comes around?
I don't know.
I bet you all know. They're asked to stay at home.
Asked to stay at home.
So that's a really good way of addressing the needs of autistic people when they're actually excluded from the process that's supposed to create an environment for them.
But it's too hard just to go to a school and suck it and see.
Oh.
Is there no hard advice that can be given to you? These schools are...
Don't give up. The advice is don't give up and don't give in. So if you go to a school and you're not happy with that, you just move right on, because it's not worth doing the experiment, you know, because the person that you love and you want to be, and people in your case, that you want to be fostered, the worst thing I think is, Mandy's done some of this work where most of young people will say, they've been bullied at school. When we do studies of adolescents, they'll say they've been bullied at school. So you want to get an environment that's supportive for your child or children, and that you need to seek that, because the worst thing that can happen is for that person to lose their self-esteem, and that happens again and again and again. So, you know, it's just... You've got to do a lot of walking around. I wish you didn't have to. We'd see a future where that's not going to be the case. That's why we're working in the Autism CRC to really change that. But for those people now where you are, that's not a lot of help. But I just think stick it out and get the right fit.
I think you need to go and talk, and you need to talk to people, and you need to find out what the attitudes of senior people in the school are, because even if you've got a friendly teacher who knows what to do, if that teacher's not got the support of senior staff, it's not going to work. So that's very important that you have that, and bullying is a big issue, and that is something that a lot of people report.
We wish you all the best on your journey.
Francis, could I just add, and Penny, I hope you are the next person to talk about this, because I'm going to give you the lead in, and say that the ICANN movement is trying to address this issue, who are autistic adults who are leading the acceptance and inclusion in schools, And Penny's been a great advocate and for that, so perhaps that's appropriate for you to tell that story.
So yeah, I'm Penny from the ICANN network, but those lights are really annoying, so I'm now not going to be facing you.
Yeah.
I have got a reputation of being hoodie girl, so I've got a reputation in the in the autism world for being sensitive to lights. So the person next to me has just said to the parent, go to the school with a checklist, so when you're in a meeting, you haven't forgotten the 7th and 8th question that you want to ask, because I'm sure after the first couple of school meetings, you probably dread the school meeting and are stressed and forget what you want what all the questions are. And I often will have a checklist when I'm going into a meeting. But the ICANN network is a rethink on autism, making autism mean I can, not I can't. We focus on the strengths of the spectrum rather than the deficits, and we're run by people on the spectrum for people on the spectrum, and we're the first social enterprise business in Australia that does this. And yes, that's my little parrot pitch that I always do. But I put my hand up and was waving it around to say that the ICANN network also has a mentoring program in schools where we have young adults who often are at uni or TAFE who go into schools and mentor the secondary students. So it's peer-to-peer mentoring, because obviously it's important that these kids know that they're not the only one. I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was 14, and that was in year 9, and it took until the end of semester 1 of first year, so almost 5 years, until I actually knew somebody else who had Asperger's. So I often tell the story of, here I was in the campus centre being told, I've been meaning to tell you something all morning, Penny. Alicia has Asperger's too. So here I was at lunchtime in the campus centre, jumping up and down. I was that excited. Because I knew that I was a bit different, so it was good to know that there are other different people like me. Because 1 in 100 people roughly are on the autism spectrum, but it took me 5 years to meet one more person. And of course now from Facebook and talking at events and stuff, I know a lot more people. But certainly as a teenager, when you are being bullied, I think if you know you're not the only one, that will give you a bit more resilience.
Thank you, Penny. And I'm really fascinated, Judy, before we take another question, because one of the things that you raised with me was that social media is now allowing people on the spectrum to make those connections that Penny's talking about. It's revolutionising the way that they communicate, because previously, if you were non-verbal, life was pretty tough. But now we're having there are different exciting opportunities for people to express themselves and to make those connections.
And the other part of that is the most valuable source of information for us neurotypicals when we're trying to get ourselves around, get our head into the space of understanding the autistic world is blogging. And we have some incredible blogs from autistic people, many, many, many. So you've only got to Google, and there are hundreds of them. And some of these are giving daily stories about life, and it's not just the Temple Grandins anymore. Anyone can pick up, one of these and tell us about their lives, whether they're verbal, non-verbal, and share those stories and get feedback from other stories, from other people, autistic and non-autistic. And there are some incredible conversations. Now, I'm a night owl. I like to stay up very late at night, and at midnight, you can always be part of a conversation about autism, let me tell you. It's pretty good. There's always someone there having a chat, and it's really comforting. I find it's not only comforting, I find it illuminating. I find it great to read people being able to express themselves in a way that is no one's judging them. It's just so honest, and as you say, always honest, but respectful. So social media has opened so many new avenues, and I'm sure even tonight, it's not just about being IT specialists, it's just another way of communicating.
Now we have a question in the third row there.
Sure. My name's Darian McLean. I wear a couple of hats here tonight. I'm a parent of a young man who's 37 and effectively missed some of the best early intervention stuff that was happening. In fact, my son was a subject as part of Amanda's thesis. So I met Amanda many years ago, and he is part of a cohort of individuals that have a number of labels, but particularly they have a history of behaviours of concern or challenging behaviours or complex support needs, whichever you like to call it.
Euphemisms.
Sorry?
Euphemisms.
Yes. Euphemisms.
You're going to be as bad as me getting that word out.
I also work as an advocate in this area as well. I run a support group for family members of individuals who have this history. And I would have to say the key for certainly for individuals 25 probably and older, currently the system is traumatising them rather than necessarily offering them any really effective support that brings about the quality of life things that have been talked about tonight. Where I have seen better outcomes or improving outcomes is where family members have taken over the service delivery through direct payment arrangements with their individual support packages. And I am one of those parents.
So how does that work? Explain what that is.
My son gets a package from the government that pays for his support, and I run it. So I hire the people that support him. I run their payroll. I train them. Do all of those things. I would much rather not have to be that involved, to be honest. It's affected other areas of my life. It's made it difficult for me to work to the level that I need to. And I know that I'm certainly aware of some families where the mum or the dad have actually ended up retiring early so that they can continue. Now, in my instance, my son accessed the support system when he was 21. So that's the residential support system. When we were having some difficulties coping at home, I know a lot more now than I did then, and I would never have done what I did. But the reality is that after 12 years in that system, what we are dealing with now is post-traumatic stress rather than just autism. And by us now focusing on a teaching model, so looking at the things that you talked about for the early intervention, but applying it to an adult. So I guess my question is, how closely are we looking at that, developing greater models of teaching for these individuals? Because what inevitably happens is that family members end up not coping because of the behaviour that occurs at home. They ring the department for help. There's very little effective help. In the end, the only way that they get any release from that daily, constant, hypervigilant drain is they relinquish their son or daughter. And they go into that support system. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily solve their problem. They end up with a whole lot of other issues to deal with. In my case, I've taken my son out of that support system, put him in his own rental home, developed a support team around him. I've worked on community engagement. I have an individual here tonight who's become involved as just a caring, interested community member who's not paid. And I guess my other concern is that these individuals, I know that there are higher functioning individuals who are affected by, the social connection or not having great social connection. The group that I'm talking about have none. None at all. And that's really concerning. And what's happening in my son's circumstance, he's out in the community now, and sometimes his behaviour is really bizarre, very interesting, unique sort of behaviour. But what we're seeing now is that there are community members who are now not being scared by that, but accepting him as a very unique member of his local community, and he's teaching them a lot about autism. So
maybe you can talk about your the social community network that you've developed around him, Darian, because I just think it's quite unique, but I just think as a very useful model that other people should know about.
Well, to be honest, I didn't develop it. So people who became part of his life and saw him for who he really is, rather than the negatives, but saw that he's a caring, gentle, respectful, artistic, unique individual. They were the ones that started this process, and it just grew. So he has a community Facebook page, and currently we're heading towards 500 members of that page. So if he has a history of wandering, which is very common for people on the spectrum. Now, he's not at risk when he wanders. Some would argue that, but I've worked really hard to prove that his dignity of risk is really important. He'd have no life if we worried about all of the risks. But there are some individuals who can't cope with that. But they are now getting on the Facebook page and saying, oh, I just saw him on Fitzsimmons Lane. He looks happy. He's got clothes on, which is always a bonus. But he's walked to Dramana from Greensborough 3 times. So,
But people are tracking him on the way, and looking out for him.
They are.
There was an awful lot of goodwill when I looked at that site, and it really made me think about what an effective way that can be for many more people on the autism spectrum. It's meaningful for him that he goes wandering. He likes doing that. That obviously he wouldn't be doing it if he didn't like it, and that people are monitoring him and making sure, and you can look there and say, okay, he's all right.
Well, the reality is he was in locked accommodation before I moved him because of his history of choosing to access the community independently. He was locked in and he got out. Yeah. So there were over 150 plus missing person reports from a locked environment. So that told me things, that communicated some really important
What you're talking about, though, really is community awareness, community understanding,
Acceptance.
Acceptance of the person and the person's own particular interests. People have to take risks to live and to grow, and when we lock people on the spectrum, like Hayden, up, then we're not treating them as unique individuals who can do that. And some of it's lack of awareness and lack of understanding. And I think too, not understand when people have different ways of communicating, not understanding communication properly, not understanding that there are more ways of communicating than putting together a grammatically correct sentence to tell someone how you feel. And that's education and training of the community, and also with people who work with people who have autism or have other disabilities in general, is to also to recognise things like anxiety, not feeling well, and recognise those as sources of behaviour, to recognise frustration. I think what people miss is that many of the things that people with autism do that upsets people are things that we all do when we're stressed or we're upset. But we've got better means to communicate how we feel, and people understand us more.
Is there also not at the very heart of this, and I'll get to you in a sec, Nick, an issue about accepting at the core of everything that difference is okay?
That's right, you're
we've
different.
got to fight that battle across a whole range of issues, whether it's about people's sexuality, the colour of their skin,
That's
and
right.
their condition. And we're losing that battle at times, it feels.
There's I think we took 3 things. This is a bit of my mantra, which is I want to get away from the big A, the capital A around autism, and I want to come and talk about 3 A's, lowercase a's, which is autism, awareness, acceptance. And without, I think, those 3 things, you really can't have respect. And without respect, and that's a capital R, respect is a capital R, and without respect, you can't facilitate a meaningful, decent life for people. So, you know, Hayden, you have to respect Hayden's need to go wandering miles and miles and miles.
He's going to be okay.
He's going to be okay. And really, I think that's the bottom line. And I mean, it's really not about disability. It's not about autism. It's about life and living. You know, racism, sexism. You know, it all comes down to a single word: respect. And I think we really want to here, because this is our field. We want to talk about autism, and you know, and I want autism to be that small a. Down the line, I think it'll be the small a. When you're giving the diagnosis to the family, it's a small a, it's not a terrible thing, you know. And I think if we can get there, I think we've done okay. There's a question.
I think, Nick, did you want to say something before we go?
Only pick up on the point about people on the spectrum react the same way when they get upset or bothered, the same as people not on the spectrum. For me, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But the point of difference, and it may be the cause of apprehension with people not on the spectrum, is that my interpretation of events and what's going on around me is completely different.
Oh, it is, and that's
So
what you need to understand.
So what that means is things that will make me at rest and things that will make me stressed are different from people not on the spectrum. And it's that unknown, because they can't tell, it's that judgment, or they're unexpected. That's what the difference is. We act the same way, but it's the causes. In my normal day life, I establish routines because being on the spectrum, routines are really good for me. I try and pick routines that have no impact on anyone else, and they won't even notice them. But it means I can fall back on those when the rest of the day goes down the gurgler dealing with the non-Asperger world.
Yes. So I guess what I'm saying is that people with autism will react in a fairly similar to the way we do. If I'm anxious, I might start pacing up and down, doing some sort of fairly repetitive task because it's calming me down. The reasons I'm doing it will be different from the reasons that you're doing it. The reasons will. But without understanding and learning about people with autism and how they're similar and different to us, then we won't understand that someone like Hayden, for example, might be getting upset in a way that someone else might get upset. What we don't understand is the source of his upset, and if we don't understand the source of the upset, then we can't help the person.
There is one. Is it working now? Yeah. There is one observation I would like to add. When I was a child, and or even a young adult, and I did something that was bothersome to another person, the normal human reaction, I now understand, will be like a facial expression or a gesture.
Yes.
And if that's not getting the result, that will lead to more obvious verbal and perhaps physical aggression. But as a child on the spectrum, I don't pick up facial expressions. So all I learn is when things aren't going my way, get aggressive. Because I never learnt the non-verbal cues that you guys are doing. So it's taken me a while as an adult to understand. I still can't recognise them, but now I understand. So that's the only addition I would say about the getting upset bit is I miss out on the initial responses from people because I cannot see them. My partner has green eyes. I'm told that because I've never seen them. I don't see eyes at all. It's like pixelated out. Hopefully she's got green eyes because I don't know.
This is where Cheryl, I think, is talking about the issue of awareness, and this is where we have to think out of the box to understand how someone on the spectrum might be seeing this particular situation and why they might be exhibiting this particular behaviour. We as neurotypical people have to learn to think outside of the box. I think one of the problems too, which hasn't come up tonight, and people may disagree with me, is that often when autism is depicted in the media, it's negative. Really negative. And so then when someone who doesn't know much about autism or has never met a person with autism before, they've just got this terribly negative view to fall back on because that's all that they know. And that, again, is the issue of raising awareness.
I want to get to a few more questions because we are running short of time. It's 8 o'clock. I think we've got a couple more to go. So if you could ask your questions, that'd be great. Introduce yourself. and ask
My name's Richard. I'm an autistic adult. I was diagnosed in my 40s. And so my impression overall of everything that's gone on tonight is the key word, there's two key words for me, and it's acceptance and it's what Cheryl brought up is respect. And I think the respect flows out of the acceptance. John mentioned awareness. I think the time for awareness is actually past. I think that's gone and it doesn't actually give us any value anymore. I think there was a time where it does, but I don't think that time's anymore because it doesn't actually have any action that goes with it. It's acceptance now that we need in order to get respect. And I think that actually flows across all the things we've talked about, whether it's early intervention, and then it's acceptance means it's early intervention that doesn't try and change the person into a non-autistic person. And it's when it comes to research, it means let's actually look at research, not to find out what causes this, not to find out what the gene is that we can turn on or off, but actually how to make life for this person the best it can possibly be. When it comes to education, it means accepting that this person is different and maybe they can't do all that group work, and that's okay. Maybe the fact that you've got all these displays up around the room is your biggest problem in what's actually causing issues for this person. Or the fact that they can't concentrate because there's so much noise or so much light. There's just so many... and when it comes to employment, again, I've never held a job for more than 2 years. I'm very capable in a number of areas, but I've never held a job for longer than that, and it's never, maybe never's too strong, but in my mind anyway, it's never been because I can't do the job. It's always been because of the social contract, I guess the stereotype of the gathering around the water cooler or whatever. And one thing that I've noticed is similar to what was brought up about being pushed into a situation of having to manage people. When you actually become reasonably successful at what you're doing, a way of promotion is to be pushed into that. And so I guess my question flows into how do we change the narrative away from autism as a negative thing to autism as a difference and a divergence, but not a negative divergence, without throwing away the fact that there are very real struggles for autistic people, whether that's around communication or whether that's around social, whether it's around education or whatever it is. But how do we change that narrative away from the negative and into difference?
I think awareness actually is important in changing the narrative to move to where you want to be, which is acceptance. Because there's an awful lot of people out there who have no awareness, and I think the people here are best to talk about that because they either live the experience with their families or themselves.
For me, I'm trying to think of the best example. I guess when I go for job interviews, as an example, you were always told, well, not job interviews, when I was growing up, there was this thought of you should identify your strengths and work at them and use them, and identify your weaknesses and address them. Well, once, because of my Asperger's, pretty much the addressing of the weaknesses for me is a waste of time.
Yeah.
I don't have the full toolbox. I am never going to be a social butterfly of any consequence. I'm not going to know what to do when they have birthday cake in the workplace. I'm not going to know what to do when they say goodbye to people and sometimes they shake their hand and sometimes they give it a gift. I have no idea what to do, and I'm never going to have the idea of what to do. So what I do, I always promote myself, like in job interviews, about the things I am good at. To back that up, you mentioned social media. I don't have anything to do with Facebook or Twitter, mainly because I have a Defence Force security clearance, and that is a very bad thing to get into. Yeah. But I have a LinkedIn profile which is for work, and I make sure that, well, I don't make sure, I transcribe all the positive remarks about me from my peers in LinkedIn, and I give that over to the interviewer saying, this is what, you're asking my strengths, I'm really good at detail, I'm really good at process, I'm really good at problem solving and analysis and logical thinking and persistence. Here's what 50 people have said about me, not just me saying it. So that's a strong focus on the positives. When I have to talk about my negative weaknesses, what I say is, well, I'm not good at dealing with a whole lot of other people, but because of the focus I have on processes, I'm so involved in it. So I try and turn that around. So I guess the answer I would give for me, it's as an individual, I'm always emphasising the positive. And in the workplace, I can't think of an organisation that doesn't want the best out of its employees, which is one reason why I disclose. If you want the best out of me, you have to understand how to get the best out of me. If you provide that mechanism, you will get the best out of me.
It's a big win if they actually do some listening to you and understand that. We've got a question here.
Hello. Hi, my name is Debashish Mandal. I'm an occupational therapist and key worker in early childhood intervention. So, my experience is, I'd like to share one of my experience. I went to see one of my family. For the first meeting, I asked, what would be your primary goal? The family said, look, we couldn't go to our favorite restaurant for last 3 years. We want to go and want to have a peaceful dinner in that place. So this is very important for us, and we are just missing this. So why I'm sharing this experience with you, because as an early intervention professional, we find it very hard for the families, to find their own time, have respite, and to look after themselves, their relationship, and everything. We visit them every 2 to 3 weeks. We provide them strategies. We link them to other organizations. But at the end of the day, it's the families who need to implement and follow through those strategies. So it is a very challenging task for us when we provide the support to the family, but we can't provide enough support. There is no long-term support for the families at this stage, what we find. There are some 12 weeks or 16 weeks of respite we can apply through Department of Education or training now, but it's just for interim. We have to have a backup plan, and we just struggle with that every day. Wanted to share this with you and wanted to have some opinion on that.
I think...
Thank you.
It gets back to, and I think it gets back to the previous point, Richard, about acceptance. And so where we need to move this debate is about, I empathise and sympathise and understand the family that doesn't want to take the child to a restaurant, because why? Maybe the child is hyperactive, wants to run around, eats food in a particular way, wants to be under the table, wants to make a lot of noise. Is this... Okay. So again, because we are providing places that are not ASD friendly, and I don't mean just having a bundle of toys in the corner. I mean it's a combination of acceptance, and again we live through very similar circumstances, and our son would like to be under the table during the meal. Did that hurt anyone at all? But people still found that quite strange, and people would ask us to take him out from under the table. He doesn't like wearing shoes. Does that hurt anyone at all, except when there's health standards? So some of it is about us, the community, coming part of the way, and understanding that to go out to dinner, you don't all have to sit here with your cutlery and do this. What's so bad about being on the floor or providing beanbags in the corner or whatever it might be? So that's part of it, and that's acceptance that we all have different ways of socialising, and we don't all want to sit up and have polite conversation. So the community has to move, and also we have to be more, and that's the point about acceptance. The other side of this is people say, don't do that, and the again, the point made before around trying to normalise people. The more it happens, the more we are accepting, the more we see this happening, we'll see people behaving in a diverse range of, and saying, okay, that's fine. That's, what's so right? We are so narrow. I talked about it before. Our whole neurotypical world works in these little boxes, and expects certain behaviours. So you vote with your feet in terms of what businesses you support. We need to support those that are actually going out of their way to make acceptance possible, and it is happening. It has changed quite considerably.
But we also all
respite
want to...
is not necessarily the answer. So I was going to say that the hard thing for families... Sorry, Cheryl, it's the last point I'd make. Respite's important. It has its place, and we couldn't have lived without respite at times too. Respite is important. But that's the Band-Aid, saying, well, you know, we'll have our family meal without that child. If you're going to be part of a family and the full family experience, we actually have to make it possible for families to do things together. And that means the community has to change and public spaces have to change.
We've got time for one more question.
My name is Graham Schaefer. I'm interested in what the future might hold. Cheryl, can you want to talk about some of the research that you're doing in the centre and in the CRC and how that might change the lived experience in the future?
That's my PVC of the College of Science, Health and Engineering. Very good question, Professor Schaefer. Look, yes, I do. I would like to answer that. I think our view really is we're not about changing autism or denying the autism in people. We see that as part of the normal human variation, part of neurodiversity. What we really want to do and what we're working towards at La Trobe is really trying to prevent often the learning disability that accompanies autism, which then can really impact on the person's life and on the person's ability to lead a decent life, that's decent for them, not decent for anyone else, but that's decent for them, that's meaningful, not for anyone else, but that's meaningful for them. So I guess the tenets for us really at the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre, and we're working very closely with the CRC on a number of our projects, it's about getting that, I think I mentioned before, that infant identified very early so we can get access to supports to have that young person being able to communicate so they can speak for themselves. It's about having that young person be able to access things like education that you spoke about so that that person then has a high quality experience in education, and when they leave our educational institutions, that they can begin to contribute to society in whatever way that they might want to. Employment is one way. We're working in the area of employment. I see our Hewlett-Packard Enterprises partner at the back there. Welcome, Michael. We're working in all sorts of ways to try and increase access, having the university experience, be better for them so that they don't drop out. So many people are so smart, they get into our universities, but they drop out of the system because the tutor said, you need to have this essay done by the 25th of September. But what they haven't said is you need to have the essay done, but also hand it in.
And that is actually a true story.
And so it's really about being able to facilitate that person, having the necessary supports. So we're really trying to work right across from infancy, which is where my strengths lie, right through adulthood to change the narrative for those people. And that's really what the Autism CRC is about. 3 core program areas: early identification and diagnosis, making sure we can educate our kids well, because we're doing a shocking job of it, we really are, and then being able to provide them with a meaningful life via employment, via being able to contribute to society. That really is the narrative, I think, that we'd like to see happen.
And I think one of the other things that also our research is focusing on, which hasn't come up so much here, but for some people who have autism is a real problem, is debilitating anxiety, and which can lead to other significant mental health problems. And we're trying to understand that and why that happens and what can be done, therefore, to help with that, because for some certain people that can actually turn out to, and its consequences can turn out to be more debilitating than some of the other things that we've been talking here tonight, the autism itself. So that's one of the other things that we're interested in working on.
But I think it's important to note that from the experience that John shared with us of what it was like 50 years ago to where you've taken it to today is a world apart, and that progress, if it continues, offers a lot of hope for people living with the condition who are about to encounter it in their own lives at some point.
And the families. We can't just focus on the person with autism. We also need to think about the families, because we all of us are part of a family and a community and a society, and we just need to work at every level there to really get to people with autism being able to have a decent and meaningful life. And I think we need to look at that holistic, because sometimes we can focus on the person with autism and forget, the rest.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that tonight's been illuminating and engaging for you, and that it maybe starts a conversation for people in this room that might actually improve the quality of their lives for themselves and for their loved ones. Can you please thank everyone involved, Cheryl, Amanda, John, Judy and Nick.